and they had this competition to see who could get the most new subscriptions for at the time was the Herald American and the Herald Journal. And whoever did, they were going to allow to be a ball boy at an NBA game that was coming to the Dome. It was going to be the Boston Celtics versus the New Jersey Nets. And as a young kid, I was a huge Boston Celtics fan. Larry Bird was the player that I most identified with. You know, as an older person, I wouldn't realize how much I identified being an old, a goofy-looking white guy. But that's who I most identified with. And it was just, for me, it was like, man, this would be a dream come true to be a ball boy for an NBA game, not just any NBA game, but for the Boston Celtics. And happened to be the year after Larry Bird retired, so he wasn't going to be there. But still, Robert Parrish was on the team, and a bunch of other players that I was really excited about. So I went out every single night, hitting the streets of Syracuse to get as many people as I could to get signed up. I was going into parts of Syracuse that I had never even been before, knocking on doors, introducing myself. And, I was a young, I don't know, maybe 8, 9-year-old kid. The paper routes were technically under my sister's name, but I was the one who did them. And, younger than probably anybody they had seen before. And I had this cuteness factor. That probably still hasn't worn off. I think that's still sticking around. But I had this cuteness factor that just allowed me to win this competition. After night, for weeks, just going out door to door, spending my evenings, talking to random strangers, I got the most subscriptions and was able to be the ball boy for this game up at the Dome between the New Jersey Nets and the Boston Celtics, right? Like, when you have something in mind that you really, really want, there is no length to which you aren't willing to go after it, right? When I was courting Chazla, we weren't even dating yet, but we were just kind of talking and getting to know. She would drop these little hints about things that she liked, and I remember her talking about really liking McDonald's coffee. Iced coffee. She had this thing about iced coffee, and she was a teacher, so she would wake up at the crack of dawn to go out after school, and she always was just loved to have this McDonald's iced coffee. Now, I am a young, freshly out of college, maybe just a couple years. I'm by nature a night owl, but again, being single, not having much responsibilities, it would be no big deal to stay out until 1, 2, 3 in the morning doing things. But when I heard that she really liked McDonald's iced coffee and she got up super early, I thought, how cool would it be to wake up early in the morning, go get her coffee, and put it on her car so when she came out in the morning, it would just be sitting there. It's the part where you go, oh, right? Because I'm still, yes, nice, it's a tough crowd here. So I did it. I got up early, I didn't go to bed early, but I just got up early, was super tired, went and got it, and something about that coffee must have worked, because here we are 4 kids later and many years later, happily ever married. But there is, right, this kind of formula that depending on how much you want something, usually we can tell by how much you're willing to pursue it. I boiled it down this way. The price you are willing to pay reveals the value that you place. When it comes to life, when it comes to all things, if there's something that you really want, we can kind of tell how much you value it based on how much you're willing to pay, based on how much you're willing to sacrifice, based on how much you're willing to go after it. It determines how much value you put on it. It's funny to watch my kids now in the same age group I was when I won that contest. Now they're raising money for things like fine arts competition, and over the past few weeks they've been going out raising money by selling Krispy Kreme donuts. I'm sure who here has been accosted by my kids? Yeah, to buy Krispy Kreme. Yeah. They are just in the beginning of the fundraising stage, so I promise you will be accosted again for more money. But they now went out to the streets of Eastwood. Here we are in the city, right, going out to the streets of Eastwood, and there's just people who are like throwing down $50, $100 donations, not even buying donuts, but just because that cute, cuddly factor wore it off from their dad and is now a part of them, and they're able to do it. But they are spending their evenings just going door to door, selling donuts because they have a value for this fine arts competition that they want to go to, that they're willing to sacrifice their time, their energy to go after it. The price you are willing to pay reveals the value that you place on it. So here we are. Last week we started the series in our new facility talking about what does it look like to be a church for everyone. That the gospel isn't really the gospel unless it's a gospel for everybody. unless, no matter your demographic here in the city or outside the city, no matter your race, religion, your sex, if it's not a gospel for everybody, then it's not really the gospel. And last week we looked at Jesus's commissioning words to you and I after he rose from the dead and he ascended into heaven. He gave us this, what we call the Great Commission, that says to go into all the world making disciples. That our goal is to be making disciples. If we're choosing to follow Jesus with our life, that we're called to be not just a disciple, but to be a disciple maker. Now, I didn't have this definition for you last week. I came up with it this week, but this is a great definition for whether or not you are a disciple. You know that you are a disciple when you have a disciple who is discipling someone else. All right, I know this kind of sounds a little inceptionist, like a dream within a dream within a dream. But this is the way at which we are called to live when it comes to being a disciple and making disciples. It's not just good enough to come to church. You may be getting all sorts of information, but you are not becoming a disciple until the iron hits the iron or the rubber meets the road. And then, even then, it's still not quite until you have someone underneath you who then you're pouring into. And even then, it's still not quite achieving discipleship status until that person has now caught a glimpse of pouring into somebody else. So, for the sake of not embarrassing anybody, myself included, we're not going to raise hands, but there's probably a good chance that a lot of us this morning don't reach this discipleship definition. Because one, maybe we're not even in a relationship where we're trying to be more like Jesus. Two, maybe we don't have someone underneath us that we're trying to pour into. Or maybe three, the fruit of even that person is not, they aren't someone who's pouring into someone else. And last week was this kind of, cold, hard look at the difference between being a Christian versus being a disciple. Our culture, Christianity is kind of commonplace. In the world, it's kind of a, commonplace. A third of the world's population, they would say, would identify as a Christian. But just identifying a Christian doesn't mean that you are a disciple. More often than not, Christians are just a result of some kind of decision that was made. There's some kind of moment where someone said, hey, do you want to get out of hell free card, say this prayer, and now you're good. And as a result, most people would probably claim to be a Christian just because of a decision they made, rather than it being a lifestyle that they are now living. And that is a big difference. Because when you're just a Christian based on a decision, then other parts in your life begin to impact what Christianity looks like for you. It begins to affect the lens through which you view Christianity. All of a sudden, you can put Christianity anywhere on the list that you want to. You can put it after your race, you can put it after your religion, you can put it after your sex, and all of those things begin to influence, and you can probably see in our culture today that a lot of those things are influencing what it means to be a Christian. And now there's all sorts of kind of buffet-style gamut of what it means to be a Christian. Rather than when you say, I'm going to be a disciple, disciple means I'm putting it at the top, and now all those other things get viewed through that lens of being a disciple. What does God expect from me in my being a good male or female? Or what does God expect of me in my race? And all those things begin to become seen through the eyes of being a disciple. So this morning, we continue on talking about this idea of the gospel being for everyone, or it's not the gospel, by looking at another hero of the Bible, and especially the New Testament, the writer of the New Testament. He goes by the name at first of Saul. Now, Saul, for most of us, is just your typical religious fellow in the New Testament. Although he was not like most Jews, in that the Jews were kind of an occupied race within that area, Saul was a Roman citizen. So he had more rights than your average Jewish person, than your average Jewish religious leader. And as a result of that, he was allowed to go and to travel, and he felt such a cause to be a good Jew that he would go out and begin to arrest and be a part of the killing of Christians. There was this young kind of religion that was forming called the Way, and it was a bunch of people who were choosing to follow this dead carpenter. And Saul thought that this was a great hindrance to the Jewish faith, so he went around, and his job was to make a name for himself in arresting and killing Christians, until one day Saul is on a trip to do just that, and God begins to reveal himself to him through a vision, cause him to go blind, and through the series of events, Saul goes from Paul, becomes a convert, and begins to direct all of that energy towards now telling people about Jesus. And as a result of that, we have most of the New Testament, we have the New Testament church, and he talks to a group of people, or he planted a church, the Corinthians in Corinth, and he begins to hear some rumblings about the way that they're acting. The people of Corinth, there's all sorts of fighting going on because people are vying for power and for status, and he's thinking to himself, this is exactly what I was a part of when I was a really good Jew amongst the Pharisees, and I do not want to see this become what being a Christian looks like, what being a disciple looks like in following Jesus, because that's not what it's about. It's not about position. It's not about power. It's not about being able to control other people. So he writes a letter to them, and he begins to tell them, hey, you know, technically, we have a lot of freedom. It probably would be a letter that he could share with America, right? Because we have the same kind of roots where we are America, and we feel like, you know, we have the Constitution, we have these freedoms, and we are free. And he begins to say the same things to the Corinthians. He says, I know that technically we all have the right to be free. And he begins to hone in on a very important part. He says, though I am free, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, he says, though I am free and belong to no one. Then any one of us born in America, we could probably claim the same kind of status, right? We, based on these inalienable rights, these are things that because we are creations of God, the founders of our country would say, that we are free. But it doesn't stop there. He said, even though that's technically who we are, he says, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone. Now, in some translations, it may say a servant, but the best word for this is slave. Paul's using this idea, if you've ever seen any kind of old kind of Roman time movies, slaves literally had like a collar placed around their neck that identified them as belonging to somebody else. And in belonging to somebody else, that somebody else could tell them to do whatever they wanted, right down to killing themselves, and they would have to do it as a slave. It's not a pretty word that Paul's saying, like, you know, we're hired help and you get treated nicely and there's a paycheck at the end of the week. He's calling you and I, in following Jesus, that even though we technically by birthright, being born in America, or him as a Roman citizen, being born as a Roman citizen, have rights to freedom, he says, I've made myself a slave to everyone. Literally, I'm putting myself in chains. I'm allowing myself to be dragged around by other people. And he's going to tell us why in a second. But this is a really important part because a lot of times we allow our freedom to kind of influence our faith. You think, you know, we live in America, I'm American, I'm free to do whatever I want. Or sometimes faith is seen more as a dictatorship. We have these different places where they kind of rule by an iron fist and you have to do it this way or else you get excluded or you get sent away, and fear and shame is used as a way to control people. But Paul offers this third way of living out our faith, and he describes it as being a slave. That something happens when you and I choose to be a slave. For the life and for the purpose of influence other people, when we choose the slave lifestyle, that something's going to happen. He says, when we do this, I have made myself a slave to everyone so that to win as many as possible. Not to beat as many as possible. Our culture is really good. You can probably go on YouTube and you can see on the news all sorts of examples of people trying to beat other people into a relationship with Jesus. Now, maybe not physically, but they figure if I just have the right debating skills, right? And if I just learn enough about Mormons and what makes them wrong and what makes them evil, then when I have a conversation with them, then I'll be able to win them by beating them. Or if it's somebody of a different lifestyle or orientation, that if I just have the correct arguments, that is going to win them over. To beat them. But Paul says this word to win is is this idea that they lay down their arms and just walk over to our side. During World War I, there was the story around Christmas time where the battle lines were drawn between the British and the Germans. And one Christmas Eve nights, they began to hear from the other side. The British heard the Germans, what would be known for us as Silent Night, they began to hear that tune being sung in German across the battle lines. So the British began to join them in singing it in English. And after the song had finished, one of the people shouted out, "Hey, if you don't shoot, we won't shoot." Right? And as the night passed, the following morning came, Christmas morning, all of a sudden, they began to get out of their battle trenches and they began to interact. They started playing soccer games together. They started seeing each other not as enemies, but they started seeing each other as other fathers and husbands. And for that Christmas day, they had won each other over. Now, up to that day, they were trying to beat each other. They were trying to kill each other. They were going to do it by force and through weapons, through advancing their territory. But something allowed them, in the way that they laid down their arms in this common theme song of Silent Night and this idea of Christmas and everything that Christmas stands for, it began to win them over to be able to have this day where there was not a care in the world other than just enjoying each other's company. And Paul says, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make myself a slave so that I might win as many people as possible. So that when I interact with them, when they see me, when they see the way that I'm willing to lay my life down for them, they're going to lay down their weapons. They're going to lay down their whatever's causing them to hate Christianity or Christians or Jesus. And maybe take a step closer to me. To maybe not be so uncomfortable around me. And he starts to go into some examples. He says, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. That doesn't, sound like a big deal for Paul because he's a Jew. However, Paul was somebody who became a companion of a lot of non-Jews. One of them being this young person named Timothy. Also, you have in the Bible, 1st and 2nd Timothy, or some letters that he wrote to this young Timothy. He's a Greek young kid who in Acts tells us he started to follow Paul in these missionary journeys. One of the things that's interesting about this is that for Timothy, he caught a hold of what Paul was trying to do to such a degree. He said to Paul, hey, Paul, in Acts chapter 16, he says, I want to be circumcised. Right, here's a young teenager who says, hey, Paul, bring the scissors. Oh my God. Right, not because I want to be a Jew, not because, it's important to me to be a Jew like the rest of the Jews, but because it was important to him that to reach the Jews as they were going to all these different places, that he became like a Jew. Now, we're not going to have a response this morning of, a back closet of people who want to reach out to Jews better. But it does go to show the lengths at which this New Testament church that's, again, exploding with energy, because there are some people who said, we are willing to do whatever it takes. We're willing to become a slave, not just a servant, but a slave who's willing to go through some pretty drastic medical procedures in a time frame when there's not a lot of ways to make it pleasant, if that is even possible, to do it. And that's what young Timothy did. He became like a Jew so that he could reach the Jew. Paul goes on, he says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. He's making this point that, because of Jesus, we don't have to live under the law anymore. Now we have this new covenant between us and God, where we love God and we follow him, and now he is our leader. But there's a lot of Jews who still live under the law. So he said, even though I'm free, even though I know that I have the ability, I have the freedom to do whatever I want, I'm going to become as one under the law, so as to win, not beat, not convince, but to win those under the law. And then he goes to the other extreme. He says, To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. Now, for some of you perk up, right? You think, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm just doing whatever I can because I have this freedom. This is not a license to kill from Paul, that we can just live however we want to reach those who are living however they want to. Right? We're not going to be starting a, use your imagination ministry to be able to reach people who are doing things we shouldn't be doing. He says, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law. There is a way that Christ has called you, and there's a way that he's called me to live. When disciple is first, every other area of our life is seen through that lens. He says, to those not having the law, though, I became like one not having the law, so as to win those not having the law. There's a phrase that I like to use. You probably heard me say it before. It's, to win, we're going to do anything short of sin to reach people. Now, at first glance, when you hear that, it does sound a little scandalous, right? It does sound like we're going to try to get as close to the line as possible and maybe dabble in some things that from the outside look a little suspicious. But that's not the idea. The idea behind doing whatever, short of sin to reach people means that we are going to become like the Jew to reach the Jew. We're going to become like those under the law, those outside of the law to reach those outside. Like, we're going to do whatever it takes because that's what we're called to do. We're not going to sin. We're not going to start a Strippers for Christ ministry here. Especially because it probably wouldn't bring in a lot of people looking at some of you. I count myself chief in that description, right? That's not the idea here, but it is this idea not to beat, not to persuade, but to become a slave to all sorts of different groups of people so that we might win them over. He's not done. He goes on. He says, to the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people. Remember, the gospel is for all people, or else it's not the gospel. I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessing. There is a blessing that happens when we are living in this kind of lifestyle. When we live in a way where we act as a slave to whoever it is that God's put in our path. You don't wait till you find the right person for the kind of slave that you want to be, but you look around and you look at the people that God has already placed in your life, and you say, okay, what does it look like to act as, to live as a slave in this situation? For this person, for this family, for this group of people, for this group of co-workers, there is a blessing. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to be fun. But there will be a blessing that comes out of it as a result of it. And I think about in our own family with the Doyles, we've been going through some different heartbreaks with issues with fostering here in Syracuse. And a couple weeks ago, I saw this meme that was on my Facebook feed. And I don't know who this person is, but it was the statement that caught my attention. It says, children need your attachment more than you need to protect your heart. One of the biggest pushbacks that I've heard and seen from people about entering foster care is that, man, how do you get attached to somebody with the possibility that they might go back home or that they might get taken away? And that is a very real possibility. In fact, when you get into foster care, they're going to tell you the goal is unification. Getting attached to these little people just to have them taken away. And she pinpoints it perfectly is that, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not what we're getting out of it. It's about being a slave to this group of people who have no one. And it's more important for them to be able to have attachment in their life than it is for you and I to guard our heart. That the process of being a disciple is kind of like a vice that's placed around your heart that just squeezes and squeezes and gets tighter and tighter and begins to spray, to leak because it hurts and it's painful. And it's uncomfortable. But being a slave is not about you or me. It's about the group that we are trying to win over. So it's been a few months at the Doyle household since we had Ishmael removed from our house and returned to his father. And a couple weeks ago, the teacher of the school reached out to me and said, hey, can we bring the class down to Love Handles for the end of year project? And it's also Ishmael's birthday, and we just think it would be fun to come down to Love Handles. So his school group came down to Love Handles one day last week. And as they're getting their froyo and everyone's out playing, Ishmael brings up his chair and he just sits there right next to me. And although in the background all of his friends are dancing to the music and playing the games, he said, I just want to be as close to you as possible.
Oh, good.
He's not even eating his froyo. The cup is there and it's still full of everything that he put in. And here I am trying to figure out, how do I not get too attached? How do I not get too attached? How do I not get too attached? But the goal is not to not get, he needs the attachment way more than I need to guard my heart. Way more than the Doyle family needs to guard our hearts. We're going to be a vessel through which young people find and experience attachment, whether it's for a few weeks or whether it's for a few years. And over the course of, for Ishmael, he was with us for just over a year. There was some attachments built, and I'm grateful that he had those. It's been hard for us. Our hearts hurt. But we pick ourselves up and we put ourselves back out there for it to happen again. And it very well could happen again, now that little Destiny's with us. But we're navigating this, what's the line of which to cross, where it's too much, where it's too hard. And again, this last week, just all this begins to happen. We get a call and we find out from Child Protective Services that there's been some issues where Ishmael may be removed again and we'd be willing to take them. And now there's been this over a week-long kind of court battle on whether or not Ishmael is going to be removed. On Friday, I'm leaving here out of our new space, getting things ready. As I walk out, I see the truck across the street of Love Handles, and it's Ishmael and Carl. They had gone to Love Handles. And as they're pulling out, I see a little hand waving in the windshield, and I kind of wave, and they come over and they pull out right in front of me and pull over right here in front of the church space. And I'm stuck between this battle of trying to have a relationship with Carl so we can have a relationship with Ishmael, and the whole time Ishmael is just saying, I want to come to your house. I want to come to your house. Right? And it doesn't feel like he's saying it in a fun, like I want to come play out. Like he's saying it in a way where it's like it hurts and he's in pain and he's scared. And all I think about it, I have two options. I can either cut off the pain so I don't have to deal with it and we just refuse any kind of interaction. Or I can say, Jesus, what does it look like to be a slave for this family in this situation? With everything that's inside of me, I don't believe that this man deserves it, is entitled to it. But the story is so much bigger than what he deserves or is entitled to. The story is about this little boy who needs attachment way more than I need to guard my heart and our family needs to guard our heart. So we're going to keep putting ourselves out there. We're going to keep choosing the road less traveled by. We're going to keep choosing to do the hard thing, not because it feels good, not because we enjoy it, not because it's the American dream, but because for who God has placed in our life, this is what it looks like. To put the chains on my wrist, to put the collar around our necks, and say we're going to be a slave for this family. So what does it look like for you Forward Point? What is it that's important to you in your life, and then how much are you willing to pay for it? Because what you're willing to pay reveals how much you truly value it, what it means to you. When I won this competition for the Syracuse newspaper. The day of the big game, I went to the Dome and got in line to be able to go be a ball boy. And as I get there, the people in charge say, "Oh, you're too young." Right? After all this work, after everything that I had done, there was some kind of age requirement that you had to have to be a ball boy down there on the court. And I was too young to be able to do it. So my sister had to go and do it. Right? My sister got to enjoy the benefits of my hard work. My sister got to enjoy all of the... She didn't even care about basketball. She didn't even know who the Boston Celtics are. But she got to do all the things, enjoy all of the rewards, because her brother said, "I want you to have this." Right? I am willing to do the work. I value our relationship. I value you way more than me getting this or not getting this. So 4 point, who is it in your life that God has brought? And how much do you value winning them over? Not value having enough information to be able to talk them down in some kind of debate by having the right answer, but by becoming a slave.
What happened to Ishmael?
And laying down, it's a story to be continued. It's playing out. But who is it in your life? And this morning, what does it look like for you to leave here with a purpose? Your purpose this morning in being a disciple is to be a slave. Jesus was led around, beaten, tortured as a slave, so that he could defeat sin and death in our lives. And now as disciples, we are called to do the same. So God, we come before you this morning. With the reality that we don't deserve anything that you've given us up to this point. Man, the fact that we are born and live in one of the most prosperous nations, what a blessing that only a part of the world's population can sing. So here we are on June 7th, faced with this fork in the road about, are we just going to go along with this production of American Dream factory, 2 kids and a picket fence? Or are we going to say, what does it look like? What does it look like for us to lay down our lives? To become a slave? Not that you're calling us to sell everything that we have, but maybe for some of us, you are calling us to sell some things that we have. Because maybe for some of us, the things that we have a little bit too much of us. And we're in this rat race of just being able to make enough to make it week to week. And you have such a bigger hope and purpose for us that this morning we might be able to take a step towards that this morning. That you would begin to place in our hearts some people, maybe people who have gone forgotten in our lives, or maybe people that we're reminded about all the time that annoy us. Wherever on the spectrum they are, that there's people in our life. Who is it in this moment that you have placed in our lives that you are challenging us to be a slave to? So that we might win them over. And God, where in our lives this morning maybe we've settled for Christianity. We've settled for a decision we made at some point in our life, and we never took a step into what does it look like to be a disciple? What does it look like where this relationship with you now begins to be the lens through which we view the rest of life? So for us this morning, we need to respond to the decisions that we have to make this morning. Would you help us this morning as we sing some songs? Would you help just everything else to kind of fade away until we do business with what it is that you want to do in our lives? That we want to live for a relationship with you that has impact on the community around us. Naturally expanding, like we talked about last week, with energy, bursting with energy, because a bunch of people are choosing to say, although the pressing in my heart, it gets harder and harder and hurts more and more. The attachment is way more important than guarding my hearts. So would you push us this morning into deeper discipleship with you for a gospel that is for, in fact, all people, not just some people. We love you. We have a couple songs that we're going to sing, and the prayer team is going to come on either side, and they're going to be here to pray for you. If there's some specific things, some specific people, some specific ways, you just don't know how it's going to work, it doesn't make any sense, but these are people who are willing to stand in the gap with you, and they're going to come forward in a few minutes to respond and help us respond as we sing. But first, we have a special poem.
Under the willows, I felt what it was to be here in that moment, one that could be gone in the blink of an eye. And I could enjoy that feeling only because I am free. I'm a free woman among you in our lifetime. I can walk around being who I wish to be, doing what I wish to do, going where I wish to go. What an interesting concept, to freely exist. Under the willows, I saw a glimpse of you, your vision. Under the willows, I felt the truth. Your love filled me to the brim, something I cannot keep to myself, and I am inclined to share with the world. Knowing whatever happens, it will all be perfectly fine by design. Underneath the willow, I took shade and comfort from the blazing sun. While I paused to rest upon its trunk, I gave thanks to life's splendor, to all of your surrounding wonder, and hopes to multiply your love.